And we are live. It's Dr. J here in the house. Evan and I will be chatting about menstrual irregularities and heavy menstrual flow. Evan, how are we doing today, man?
Doing really well. Excited to dive in. This is an issue that many women just deal with and they don't really get help with. They just assume that, hey, it's normal to have PMS. It's normal to have this happen with my cycle where this month it's 28 days and then the next month it's 17 days and the next month it's 36 days. And I mean, we hear these stories all day, every day.
100%. I mean, the problem with heavy menstrual flow off the bat, it's a sign of something else deeper, usually some kind of estrogen dominance. And then what's driving that, right? A lot of times progesterone's falling out too soon in a woman's cycle. And then you have all this heavy menstrual flow, and that can drive an anemia. That can drive low iron. And that's a problem because we need iron to bind to hemoglobin to carry oxygen. And we need oxygen for aerobic metabolism, right? For our mitochondria to burn fuel, generate energy and burn fuel. So we need adequate oxygen. So if we have heavy menstrual flow, you can easily see fatigue and lethargy and mood issues. And a lot of times it takes a couple of weeks to even replete that iron back up, and then you do it all over again. So it becomes this really, you're in the boxing ring every month and you're just getting beaten up, and it's really tough. So you got to fix the anemia and you got to fix that heavy menstrual flow for sure.
Would you say this is a functional problem? Meaning if you go to your doctor and you're getting conventional blood work done, it's going to get missed? Or even on conventional blood work, are you going to see certain things pop up that would be a red flag to even a conventional doctor that they would see?
It depends. A lot of times conventional doctors aren't going to run like a functional iron panel. They won't run like ferritin or iron saturation or iron binding proteins. A lot of times they don't do that. They'll run a CBC, and they may look at RBC and see if RBC is below 4, or if hemoglobin's in the 11s, or if hematocrit's in the mid to low 30s. They may run that, but it just takes a lot. Like, the issue has to be a lot more severe for the RBC, hemoglobin, and hematocrit to be a problem. So, I'll run a CBC to see where you're sitting, right? We don't want the RBC below 4.2. We ideally want the hemoglobin in the 13s. We want the hematocrit in the upper 30s. So we want to make sure that's good. But if you're using a late stage indicator, the problem needs to be going on for a lot longer to fix it. That's the issue.
Okay, let's go into symptoms briefly. I think this would be helpful for women because they'll say, okay, menstrual irregularity, how do you classify that? And then what symptoms would be associated with this? Are we talking the typical PMS issues where, there's breast tenderness stuff? Are we talking where the cycle is changing, where, like I mentioned, some months it's 28 days, others it's 36, others it's 17. Are we talking headaches? What are we talking?
Yeah. So let's get some terminology stuff out here first. I'm not sure if it's an educational issue. I speak to a lot of women. I say, how long is your cycle? And the first thing they tell me is how long they menstruate for. So it's this weird kind of disconnect. And I think it's just people aren't really educated in school about this. Most people conflate their cycle is to how long they menstruate. So a woman's cycle is their entire hormonal cycle. Usually it's 26 to 30 days, right? From day one to the first day of bleeding to the next day one, that's their whole cycle, right? Which is built on a follicular phase, right? Where the follicle grows and estrogen predominates. It's built on ovulation, where estrogen predominates and progesterone rises. That's ovulation. And then it's built on the luteal phase, the last half. So think F, follicular first, think L, luteal last, okay? And then luteal is where progesterone predominates. And a lot of the cycle irregularities may happen because of estrogen bouncing around or progesterone being either too low or dropping out too soon. And so when we talk about a woman's cycle, that's the full cycle. When we talk about menstruation, that's the period, right? So most women, they confuse menstruation and cycle length. So menstruation is when flow is happening, period, blood flow. And the cycle is going to be the entire length of that hormonal rhythm. Day one, the first day of their bleeding, blood flow, to the next day one, that's your cycle. So just from a terminological standpoint, so when we're looking at the heavy menstrual flow and a lot of the irregularities, it tends to happen a couple of days to even a week before we have blood flow. And of course, some women, when there's a lot of estrogen dominance occurring and that progesterone drops out too soon in the cycle, and I'm doing a lot of hand gesture stuff, so people aren't quite following on the auditory side. We'll put the video link below so you can see the video. But when that progesterone drops out a little too soon in the cycle, that's where we have a lot of menstrual flow. And this can really mess a lot of women up because of what I said earlier. You're going to have a lot of low iron here, low iron, low hemoglobin, and then your ability to carry oxygen really gets impaired. And that's going to make it hard to generate aerobic metabolism and support the mitochondria. Mitochondria needs oxygen. So we need that. So that's one of the collateral damages of menstrual regularities is the menstrual flow. And then of course, other things can happen like irritability, breast tenderness, back pain, mood issues, brain fog. But the key thing that's going to happen after that is going to be a lot of that blood flow driving the anemia and the low iron and the low hemoglobin and the
Yeah,
fatigue.
yeah, I was going to say the fatigue is probably the big one, right? Maybe exercise intolerance. These are women that they feel like they have to do some exercise. Maybe they're pushing themselves hard, but they just don't feel like they have enough gas in the tank to get the exercise done. It just feels abnormally difficult to do physical things. And then hair loss is big too. I mean, we've seen countless times on blood work where women will show up with really low ferritin and they'll say that every time they take a shower, I mean, they're losing a clump of hair, per shower. And that's just insane.
Yep, 100%. 100%. So it's always really good to take a look and test where you're sitting during the luteal phase. Like right around day 21 to 22 is usually a good time to test where that progesterone sits to make sure it's high enough. If you're having a lot of heavy bleeding early, a lot of times that progesterone is just falling out a little too soon in that cycle. And so we may support, if there's a lot of stress, we may support the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, right? That's the brain talking to the gonads or to the ovaries in this example, or to the adrenals. So we can support adequate levels of progesterone output. And we may use herbs like you mentioned, shepherd's purse. We may use things like chaste tree. We may use estrogen modulators like Dong Quai or black cohosh. We may use things like that. We may use special phenotypes of maca. We may even use bioidentical progesterone as well to kind of carve out and work on supporting that healthy female rhythm too.
And what led to these issues in the first place? I mean, we're talking just age, we're talking stress, we're talking pregnancies, having babies, like the xenoestrogens in the environment. I mean, what are you thinking are some of these big triggers?
So in regards to the biggest trigger, in my opinion, is going to be the fact that progesterone can make cortisol. So when women get stressed, their stress hormone is cortisol. So they're going to take a lot of that progesterone and they're going to pull it from their cortisol. All right. I'm sorry. They're going to take a lot of the progesterone and they're going to pull it down to cortisol. So then that starts to skew the relationship. So stress takes progesterone, shunts it downstream to cortisol. That can create some functional estrogen dominance. Okay. Number two is just they're depleting a lot of their cortisol output from the adrenals, and their adrenals are making some of their hormones, but their adrenals are just more depleted. That can be a big thing too. And then three would just be potential xenoestrogen exposure. And there's three big variables there. That's going to be from pesticides, right? These chemicals, they kill plants by disrupting their hormonal system and nervous system. So that's one. Number two is going to be plastics. Plastic xenoestrogens, right? BPA, or even some of the BPA free ones have other types of xenoestrogens that aren't good. And the third one is going to be hormones and meats, animal products, whether it's dairy, milks, beef, chicken, right? Just the hormones that are given to the animals to fatten them up. And so it's going to be plastics, pesticides, and hormones in the meat and animal products. So those are the big ones. So of course, eating organics is going to be good. Using Pyrex or glass containers is great, especially when heating. Plastic isn't that bad as long as everything's cool and isn't in the sun. Not as big of a deal. Once it's in the sun and you're heating it, forget about it. Especially in microwave, forget about it. Ovens, obviously, that's a no-brainer. And then, of course, pesticides. And the pesticides could be in the food. Okay, so organic helps that. It could also be in the water. So high quality water filter, reverse osmosis, or at least a carbon filter will filter a lot of that junk out.
Yeah, and people listening, they may say, God, why does everything have to be so complicated? It's like, well, we've just changed a lot. I mean, you mentioned the adrenal thing. Women now, where historically they were in the tribe and they had other women to help with the kids. Now you've got the stay-at-home mom.
And grandparents, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's back in the day. Think about it. Grandparents would be like in their 40s and 50s, probably, right? You have kids in your late teens. Your kids would have kids in their late teens. That puts you like, that puts your grandparents in their 40s, early 50s. And typically, you'd be out earning a living, paying for the home, and they'd be rearing the kids a lot. They'd be taking care of the kids. So there was a little bit less stress on the child rearing aspect of it, because you had someone there. And then typically you didn't have a big mortgage. You didn't have all these. So usually one income was enough. So then, one person could help out with the family, grandparents help raise the kids, one person required for the income. So there wasn't a ton of stress. And the income back then could be hunting, right? It could be hunting or fishing, right? It could be doing something that where you're just really providing food and shelter, and that's it. That's all you needed. So our society has evolved and changed, and there's a lot more financial stress, and some people have to have two incomes to survive too. And grandparents are older and have their own health issues and can't really participate on the day in day out of raising kids. So a lot of things have shifted.
Yeah, well, then you go further back, and before there was even bills and currency, and you had the tribe that was hanging out with each other, where you'd have, like you said, multi-generational tribes, and then you would have potentially other people that are related somehow, or maybe not related. They're just part of the tribe. And I mean, you read about these, hunter-gatherer societies where you've got women that would sometimes be nursing the children of that are not theirs, so there would almost be a shared motherhood experience. And now you've got the stay-at-home mom driving the minivan with the 3, 4 kids, running them to the park and then doing the groceries and all that alone. So, I think a lot of the social isolation aspect is really big for this stress component you're talking about, with this whole pregnenolone, progesterone, cortisol, everything getting robbed and diverted. And it's like, it's a big hormonal chaos, really. And it's because we know there was actually a study done on that isolation issue, and that isolation, being socially isolated, was comparable to like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day in terms of the toxicity. We're just not, we've never been a species like this. And now with shutdowns and everything going on, you've got people even more isolated. I mean, I have a client who's a therapist, and she said, man, everybody's a wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean? And she goes, well, because everybody's separated from each other. People are afraid to be next to one another. She said, I'm hearing all sorts of new symptoms for my clients. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So, um, what's the remedy? Well, you mentioned some of the herbs already, some of the adaptogens we'll use, and maca extracts, and shepherd's purse, and wild yam, and cohosh, and chase tree, and all those things are amazing. But I think at the end of the day, you've got to try to build some type of a community. Like Facebook moms groups are one thing, but you actually have to have like an in-person place where you can sit down with other people, have a conversation, you know, let somebody else handle the kids' chaos for a minute while you can just relax. I think we're all just stuck in fight or flight. And that's really one of the big root causes, is our nervous systems are just so turned on. And especially if you're watching the news, you're not turning off. And I think that's a big root cause outside of the environmental dietary pieces.
Yep, I totally agree. There's some data also showing that there's more relaxin, which is a hormone produced by women's bodies that can relax a lot of the ligaments and tendons. There's some data showing that there may be more ligament laxity in the last half of the cycle where progesterone is. So just be careful of over exercising or doing too strenuous exercise during the last half of the cycle. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Exercise stress could be a big one. We don't want to be over exercising. That's important. Of course, nutrient density is essential. So nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory, low toxin foods are going to be key. One, because we provide building blocks, and two, hormones are made from good, high quality cholesterol compounds, and cholesterol is connected with animal products, and that's usually connected with fat soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K. So we got to make sure all those foods are dialed in. Egg yolks, high quality grass fed beef. I had a grass fed ribeye last night with some organic green beans. It was wonderful, right? So you can do all these things with the food, good paleo template, and line up your macronutrients according to what you need as a woman. If you're more of an ectomorph, you're more lean, you're more skinny, you may be able to handle some more starch on the reg, right? Every day you can handle more starch. If you're more on overweight, you may have to lean more on your non-starchy vegetables and less fruit and starch, maybe some, but just a little bit less. So really get your macros dialed in too.
Yeah, I would say on the supplement side too, one thing we didn't mention would be like calcium D-glucarate could be really helpful. And then also, since we haven't gone down the rabbit hole yet on this podcast about it, we could briefly mention the gut and how the gut is involved in these hormonal issues, and how we've had many women that have had issues with their cycles that have spontaneously resolved just by fixing gut infections, because we've hit on this idea of the beta glucuronidase enzyme being elevated, which causes the recirculation of toxins and hormones due to bacterial overgrowth. So if you're having menstrual irregularities and you're not addressing or looking into your gut, you could work on the diet piece all day and still have issues. And we have many women that have come to us that they've done a great job on the diet, but they're still suffering. And so that's where we dig deeper. And then something like calcium D-glucarate may be used, and it can do a lot of good really, really quick with the detox piece. Even for mold, it's been helpful.
Yeah. So when we test a lot of these, we'll do a Dutch test and we'll look at things like right around day 20 or so we can see where progesterone peaks out. And we'll also look at estrogen levels and estrogen metabolism. We'll look at 2-methoxy, 2-hydroxy estrogen. We'll look at methylation markers. We'll look at pyroglutamate and glutathione. So that can give us a pretty good window if we're impaired on the detoxification side. And we can add in phase 1, phase 2 detoxification support, whether it's B vitamins and antioxidants or sulfur amino acids or extra binders or extra vitamin C or extra fibers to kind of bind up some of that. That's a really good option to therapeutically support detoxification, as well as just help excrete extra hormones that may be laying around from some of the other reasons we chatted about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the testing piece, Dutch is going to be important. I would say stool test is going to be important. Blood panels could be important. If we did have a history of like heavy bleeding, we're going to look into ferritin, do like a full iron
Yep.
panel. Potentially thyroid could be important as well. Organic acids, I mean, I would argue that'd be important too. We always run those for looking at the gut piece, the mitochondrial piece. If a woman's complaining of, major fatigue associated with this, well, is this related to the iron, or is this related to possibly the mitochondria as well that have gotten damaged by some sort of toxicity issue? So I think those would be top priorities. What about anything else? Are there any other tests that you would run to investigate this issue?
Well, if there's a lot of insulin resistant issues, insulin's a big one. So if carbs are out of whack, we may want to look at insulin levels, make sure they're closer to 5 to 7 is ideal. If they're too high, there could be some resistance going on. Of course, I always get worried about PCOS, right? PCOS is primarily driven by high insulin, and then that can cause elevations in androgens and testosterone, and that can also cause an increase in something called prolactin. And prolactin can start to dysregulate the HPAG axis, so that can kind of dysregulate the cycle. And again, that's all supported by getting blood sugar stable, right? Dysglycemia is a major hormonal stressor. And I ask women, don't jump into hormonal stress and start fasting and doing all this stuff. Get your blood sugar relatively stable, make up proteins and fats as the foundation of your meals, and make sure 100% you're getting enough nutrition. Go look at your chronometer or MyFitnessPal and look at your calories. Make sure you're getting enough. Make sure those calories are all nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory, low toxin. Make sure you're getting enough magnesium and potassium and high quality minerals. Very, very important.
Well, you said it quick, so let me just restate it and confirm to make sure it's clear. You're mentioning fasting as potentially being a big stressor that could make this situation worse, correct? Because you're saying if a woman's already nutrient deprived or she's having major issues, potentially too much blood loss, fasting is something that could throw off blood sugar balance, but also, as you mentioned before, there's no nutrition in starving. So you're saying in this case, 3 meals a day may be better than doing a fasting protocol.
Yeah, the problem with fasting can help when there's insulin resistance, but one, there needs to not be a lot of blood sugar stress, meaning up and down, right? See, people think like, oh, if I have blood sugar issues, then fasting is great. Well, not if there's dysglycemia, because dysglycemia, it means your blood sugar's up and down and up and down. And every time it goes up, your pancreas kicks in. Every time it goes low, your adrenals kick in with cortisol and adrenaline. So there's stress on those glands. So the problem with that is you want to make sure you buffer that with healthy proteins and fats. It's like putting a fire going and putting twigs and paper on it. If you ever started a fire that way, you'd be feeding the fire every 30 minutes to an hour or even more, because the fire would burn out fast. So a log on the fire that stays there for hours is like proteins and fats. And most women, they metabolically keep their fire going with twigs and paper and gasoline. And you just can't, you're going to be next to the fire all day. Those are your grazers. Okay. Or if you're trying to fast, well, eventually the fire is just not on. You're going to get cold, i.e. your metabolism is going to decrease. And if you're already nutrient deprived and now you're fasting and not getting enough nutrition, that's a problem. Now, of course, if you're going to fast and you're compressing your feeding window, the key mistake is not getting enough nutrients. So you have to get enough nutrients. Now, if you're doing it a day or two a week and you're already healthy and you're getting an overabundance of nutrients those other 5 days, of course your body can handle that, right? But most aren't in that overabundant state. They're already depleted, and that's where it's a problem.
Yeah, and you're mentioning the grazers. I mean, these people are not grazing
Correct.
on grass-fed beef jerky typically. They're going to be grazing on, I don't know, maybe some gluten-free pretzels or something. I mean, it's going to be more of like a process thing. It's not going to be, I mean, maybe it is. Maybe you're grazing on macadamias or something like that, and you'd be okay. But in general, you want to be able to have 3 solid meals per day. I find once women do actually calculate how much they're eating, most of them are under eating.
Most are. And then also, I'm not a big fan of snacks. Snacks typically mean a carbohydrate, primarily a carbohydrate, macronutrient, and balanced meal. It's smaller and it's primarily carbs, and it's usually not enough. And a lot of times, snacks can be used to compensate for a poor meal previously. So I like the word mini meal because it provides, hey, there's balance like a meal, meaning there's some protein, fat, maybe a little bit of carbs in there. Ideally, you're doing a mini meal because your next meal is just a longer gap. So, like if you had lunch at noon, but you and your husband are going out to eat at 7, well, that may be a little bit long for you. So maybe you want like a good protein, fat kind of keto bar here, or a little mini smoothie like around 5 o'clock, right? To kind of give you a little bump so your blood sugar doesn't go super low until you feel good. Now, if you're healthy, you can maybe be able to handle it. If you have blood sugar issues, then maybe a little mini meal is good right there to provide balance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And you're mentioning too, like the meals should be nutrient dense enough to where you shouldn't have to snack. But yeah, I mean, I don't go much more than 5 hours. I
Yeah.
will start to get a little shaky. If I go 6, 7 hours, it's too much for me.
Yeah. Also, just go to Chronometer, man. Just try to like put a sample meal. Like people that do OMAD stuff, 1 meal a day. I'm like, dude, go to Chronometer and put all the things you have to eat in that one meal. And you tell me if you're getting 6 to 8 servings of vegetables. You tell me if you're getting 1.5 pounds of meat. You tell me if you're getting that much fat. It's really hard. Like you're going to literally be eating probably for over an hour, like eating, chewing. It's probably going to be hard.
Oh
And you're
yeah,
probably going to
it's
feel really
impossible.
full and you'll probably have to take a break. So that's why 2 meals is doable, but you really have to be like, there can't be slack in the meal. Like it's got to be a very intentional, awesome meal. And you have to do it. 3 meals, it's relatively easy because
Yes.
you have 2 really good meals and one pretty good one, and then you're there. One is very hard. Whew.
Yep. Yep. I would
Especially if
agree.
you have tummy issues, if you have SIBO and you already have low stomach acid, well, now you're eating all that calories in one sitting. It's like, whoa, it's a
Yeah.
lot.
And how
It's
would you
stressful.
possibly digest and assimilate all that without having any issues too? That'd be very, very difficult.
It's harder. Now, people can do it if they have a really chill night and they can just sit around and relax for 2, 3 hours, and their lives aren't that stressful, right? But and their digestion's really good. They can maybe get away with it, but I think minimum 2 meals is going to just make your life easier.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
just want to point out that if you have menstrual regularities, you may need to come in and do some specific herbs to address those. But sometimes this issue is in the same category as many other issues we've talked about, where it gets fixed as a side effect of just getting healthy, just
Yep.
running you through kind of our functional medicine workup,
Yep.
supporting and looking at adrenals, supporting and working on gut, the mitochondria, the nutrient absorption, the acid and enzymes, the probiotics. Sometimes just those simple steps fix this. But if they're having an issue that's not resolved, then we can come in with these extra tools.
Yep. That
And
is
vice
ideal.
versa. And maybe we should mention this too. Vice versa, you can't just come in and do the chase tree or the Vitex or the wild yam or whatever and call it a day. You can't do that either because now you've ignored the issues that led to this problem in the first place, whether it was the glucuronidation pathway or the bacterial overgrowth or the parasite infections that messed up the nutrient absorption, which caused the nutrient deficiency, which caused the hormonal issue. So you really have to do all of it. But I don't want this to be, hey, let's go to the hormone section at Whole Foods, buy a supplement and call it there. You don't want to do that either.
Yes, you want to really get to the root cause. So the food stuff is important. We talked about some of the herbs. We talked about maybe even doing a kind of a cyclical augmentation kind of reset by using progesterone accordingly. And of course, we're supporting the adrenals. The adrenals play a big part. So when I test hormones, I'm always looking at female and adrenal together. They tell a really big role. And it's nice to be able to look at hormone detoxification. That's really helpful too, because that really gives me a window into all 3 sides of it.
Yep. Well, I think I've said all I need to say. Do you have anything else you want to go into?
Yeah. So blood sugar, nutrition, right? Diet stuff's very important. The gut plays a big role because that's where we digest and absorb all the building blocks to make our hormones. So if we have bloating or digestive issues, that could be a problem. Don't just get myopic on the female hormones. You got to remember the adrenals play a huge role. So female and adrenals. And don't jump on these fad things. Oh, just fast and do this and it'll get better. Get your nutrition, get your blood sugar, get it dialed in. And then if there's things like iron that's a problem in the interim, you really want to support that. I have a product called Iron Supreme. It's a bisglycinate iron. That's a really better iron. Or if you're more sensitive, a high quality liver glandular is great. And then obviously eating a lot of high quality red meat before and during menstruation, if flow is heavy, just to really make up some of that extra iron if needed.
Yeah. Good news is you can reverse this. It's not something you have to live with. So, like I said in the beginning, many women just kind of live with this and they just know, hey, I'm quote messed up. My cycle does this or that, and they just live with it. But you can get it resolved to where if you track it on an app, I mean, my wife, she'll track it on an app and it says, cycle's supposed to start, boom, 28-day cycles. So, before, due to birth control and other issues, I mean, her cycle was not always perfect. So, you can fix these things. You can adjust them. You can modulate them, and there is hope.
100%. So if you guys want additional help and support, we are available worldwide. Feel free to head over to evanbrand.com. You can schedule a consult with Evan, or justinhealth.com. You can schedule a consult with myself. We're there to help you. Click down below for links. And if you enjoy the content, give us a review. We really appreciate it. evanbrand.com/iTunes, justinhealth.com/iTunes, and share it with family and friends. And we appreciate you guys for joining. Take care, y'all.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye.